let's jump into the first session of the day, where we're going to be talking about talent in 2022, how to empower your people, drive talent mobility, and create workforce transparency. We've got an amazing group of panelists with us, so give me a second to introduce all of them. I have to take a deep breath now. We're joined by Michaela Schütt, who's the Global Vice President and Head of Global Talent Acquisition and Ecosystem at Siemens. Sylvia Etter, Associate Vice President of HR Systems and Program Management at AT&T. Umair Shamsi, Vice President of People Excellence at Telenor Group. Hey, Umair. We're joined by our good friend Chris, who's back again. Chris Havrilla, Vice President of Product Strategy at Telenor Oracle. And last, but certainly not least, we've got Aparna Ballakur, Chief People Officer at SumUp. Welcome, everyone. How are you all? That's the moment where everyone's like, do I talk? Do I mute myself?
Doing very well. Thank you.
Yeah. First session of the day, so no pressure.
No pressure.
to make it a good one. But thank you all for joining us. Firstly, I do want to shout out to Chris, because we just found out, Chris, it's 4 a.m. where you are right now. So that's true dedication right there. So thank you so much for staying awake, and hopefully we keep you excited and engaged that you can stick with us as well. Absolutely. But I appreciate you. Let's jump straight in. I'll come to you first, Chris. How do you define workforce transparency? It'd be interesting to hear from everyone from that to start us off.
Yeah, transparency is one of those things. It's like skills or even AI, right? Everybody, you can ask everybody the question and they'll all have different answers. But, for me, it's pretty simple. It's about being, consistently, right? Being direct, open, honest, and actually in a timely manner, where your actions and your words match about the things that matter to people, right? Things that matter about what they're doing, why they're doing it. And I think those are the two keys. What are we doing? What are we asking you? What are we giving you feedback on? Whatever that is, and why. I think it's very, very hard to build trust with people, which is, a huge reason why we're doing this, right? Without doing that. And that's how we're going to build commitment and collaboration and kind of the kind of connections that we need to do to be in this together, right? And so I think it's pretty simple from that terms for me. And it's the foundation of all relationships. And I don't know why we would do something different that we would do in our personal lives than what we should be doing in our work lives.
I would like to build on that. Because I completely agree. If we talk about empowerment of our people, then trust is the foundation. Without transparency is the foundation. Without transparency, no trust and no empowerment. Putting more the people development head, what you just said, and giving them transparency and what is expected, what's the North Star, how am I doing, everything people need to perform and grow in their job, but also in terms of growing their career. What is there in terms of which open jobs are there I could develop on? What are mechanisms, tools, approaches that can help me to grow? People need the transparency on this. And a second aspect that is equally important from my perspective, how to give the people the chance to make themselves transparent. When we changed from more or less HR managed careers to the own your career, people told us, listen, I don't want to be hidden in any HR expert system, any profile with my skills. I don't know who is accessing this, what is happening, is something happening? I want to be in charge of making myself transparent, because at the end, only I can really say what I want, what is my ambition, what is my true expectation for my future, and what am I willing to invest in that. And I think this aspect of giving people the chance to make themselves transparent with all their expertise, their skills, their experience, and actually what I said, their ambitions, this is equally important as transparency from the other side.
Michaela, when you did that at Siemens, I know you went through a big transformation, and that was part of the piece. What was the reaction from employees when you kind of delivered that message of own your own career, and here's the system that you can update your profile, go in, upskill, etc., and you just completely ripped off the band-aid and was like, look, own it, it's yours. What was the reaction that you got from employees?
Yeah, twofold, mostly positive, but of course, empowerment also comes with accountability. So we told them, listen, you are also now accountable for shaping and driving your career, but we will lower all the barriers and give you all the means. And taking this accountability and outlining the benefits and why this is necessary, this was a big cultural shift, because the immediate reaction of some people was, wow, now you don't care about me. And to really explain them, no, it's not about we don't care anymore. It's about 300,000 employees, a small HR unit. We can't drive each and every single career. And as you told us, at the end, only you, employee, know what you want and where you want to go. So you must be more in the driver's seat. But it is it not only was, it is a continuous discussion also on this accountability topic and shaping the culture and helping people by not mandating this and telling them, hey, corporate has decided, now you own it, but rather showing them the benefits, picking them up in their interests and their curiosity, and then really listening very closely what they need and giving it to them so that they slowly move into that ownership. And I would say we were surprised how quick people jumped on this, because also in VUCA times like this, people don't want to wait for an appointment or approval. If they have just some time to learn or to think about their career, they want to get actionable. And then that's why this putting up ownership to them is something we truly believe for all of those topics.
It's got to empower people to ask questions when you kind of go at that. And that's like huge, because isn't this about making good decisions no matter what, right? And how do you do that without making informed decisions, right? I love that.
What we've also found actually at SumUp is that to be able to actually empower, one of the really important things is to be able to create that environment where people feel like they can empower themselves, right? And that's largely been, for us at least, in I think a few things. One, how do we kind of build this environment where people feel the trust? Because to be able to take ownership, it should be okay to fail. Because when you take ownership, good things will happen and bad things will happen. And that should, if that means that you're going to have the consequences which are dangerous, then you'll never be able to build the trust. So for us, that's kind of been one of the big things that we've tried to focus on. And that kind of connected to creating a way in which, or ways in which people can be more autonomous, like even for teams and leaders to be kind of significantly more autonomous than they even, I think, were used to. Even in decisions, it's always very easy to say you want empowerment, but when you actually kind of create a place where you have to, empowerment also means making decisions and owning those decisions, whether it's for you or for the leadership and all of that. And that's the second part of what we're kind of trying to constantly drive. And then we added to that to kind of make it a little bit more easier, also flexibility to kind of not drive everything centrally, but to be able to have enough flexibility everywhere for people to be able to use that trust and autonomy to actually get stuff done in a way that makes sense to them. So I think, at least for us, that's what we're experimenting constantly with. And how do we build this empowerment through trust, autonomy, and flexibility? It's always continuously a work in progress, because you learn as you go along. There are some things that work spectacularly well, others not so much. But I think it just makes us better all the time, and helps everybody be a lot more happier as well. Because I know happiness is not something we talk so much in the work context, but the fact that when you feel more trusted, feel more autonomy, and feel that you have more flexibility, there's just so much more joy and happiness in what you do. It's not just about kind of just doing what somebody asks you to do.
I mean, we did that a while ago in our company as well. And I think the empowerment is one, as you say, we need to get to the culture that people get access to all those things and can utilize them. But I think the one thing that we cannot forget and have to re-emphasize as well is there is still a significant responsibilities for the managers in that. And that needed to be clarified several times, that even though the employee has to drive it and has the access to all those things that help them to drive their careers, there's still a manager that needs to help with the exposure, connecting things, and so on and so forth. And I think that's something where we needed some time to get to that, because it was like, oh, now employees are empowered. I don't have a role in that anymore. And I think that's a critical aspect in order to make that successful as well.
Here's a really important point, because that's been quite a big challenge for our leaders, right? Because we're asking them to let go the reins a lot, and they're not used to doing that. In fact, it's funny because yesterday I was having an interview, and the candidate asked me, Chris, what if we disagree? I was like, what do you mean? She's like, well, I've worked for many leaders, Chris, that, you know, they say that they're giving me this flexibility and they're empowering me to make decisions, but then they say, actually, I think we should do it this way. So therefore, I'm frustrated. I'd end up not coming to the table with any more ideas because I get shut down anyway. And she said, what's your leadership style, Chris? What would you say if I have an idea and you disagree? And it kind of took me a second to sit back and be like, what do we? And the way we do it here at HR Leaders is, if it's in line with our mission and purpose and our values, and I've empowered you to be in that role, then you make the decision, you take ownership of it, and I'll support you 100%. But you have to own that too. Like to Chris's point, you also have to own that. And she's like, okay, great. But I think for many leaders, we talk about empowerment, we talk about all of these things we're talking about, but it's hard for them to let go as well. I'm seeing that certainly with hybrid now, with everyone working remotely. You know, they're always like constantly wanting to check in with the teams and kind of then end up micromanaging, which makes things a lot more difficult for everyone.
I love that you said that, let going of the reins, you know, too, and what you're saying, Chris, because it's, you know, one of the last things I did before I left Deloitte was a really cool research project on flipping the management model and why. You know, we've been talking so much about the future of work and workplace and workforce, but we haven't talked a lot about the future of management. And it really is more about commitment and collaboration than it has been about command and control. And that's a whole new muscle set for people.
Yeah.
It's not only this letting go, this letting go of control, it also comes with new and sometimes not so easy tasks for managers. It's more about being the inspirer, showing the North Star, giving the transparency, showing how it links, which is for some not so easy to really be the inspiration for the team, but also putting the employee and the people in charge and empowered on the stage and going more in the background and also serving them in terms of, what do you as an employee or as a team, what do you need? How can I free up your back? How can I help? How can I remove barriers to set you up for success as an empowered team? And of course, at the end, also kind of coaching them, because also here, empowerment, you mentioned, Aparna, you mentioned the failure culture. That also comes with failure. And for some people, it's also not so easy to then commit and accept, I do failures. And also for managers, you still feel responsible even though someone else was empowered. I think that's something that is really a learning journey. And that's nothing that we can decide upon and then execute once it's relevant. It must go into our DNA and be part of our daily work. And there, I really believe this is a journey that's not going to go from today to tomorrow.
Yeah.
To get trust, we have to give trust too,
yeah,
right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think also I think you absolutely said it, Michaela. And I think you mentioned it also about, and we kind of try to practice this as well, which is constantly kind of helping managers, especially, think about the responsibility being more about providing context rather than control. Because it's always easier to control rather than provide context. And that's kind of always the learning experience. We kind of stumble along the way, but we found that that's kind of the biggest differentiator, constantly being able to provide context versus the control, being able to explain the why and be patient with explaining the why, and also holding back many times to just not just give the answer, but to able to get the teams to the answers itself. And that's one of the challenges as well, I think, as you grow and you have to scale this across the organization to make this. And as you bring in more leaders, newer people who've also operated in environments which are very different from this, to be able to kind of actually scale it in different ways, either it's through your onboarding or in the way you actually coach even leaders. All of this becomes super important, I think. Otherwise, it kind of becomes a one-time activity which dies along the way if it's not kind of doesn't become part of the inherent culture and the ways of working itself.
Yeah, culture is a big part of it, right? Because even I remember one of our new hires recently came to me and said, I was really surprised that we had a team meeting every Monday, and one of our new hires who just was been there like 2 days said, I actually completely disagree, Chris, with your strategy in regards to how we're going to grow our content in this particular area. And this is why, and this is my idea. And I remember one of the other new hires took me, it was like really surprised that it was okay for the new person to challenge the CEO and founder of the company and say, actually, I think there's a better way, even though they've been there 2 days. And the fact that I said, okay, again, I think that this is the right way, but I trust you, you go, because that's why I hired them, right? You go and own it. This is why I hired you, to trust to do that. And actually took the person back to say, that was weird, Chris, because in my company, you would never do that. In my previous company, you would never, ever do that. And I was like, but I forgot for a while, because I've been self-employed for a long time, that's how it normally is, right? In most companies, that's not normal. That every team member has a voice to say, actually, I think there's a better way, and that's okay. And we don't have to agree, but once we commit, we all say that we're all going to get behind that individual and support them no matter what, as well. So that's a big shift for leaders, because most of us got to where we are by being in control, by being the individual contributor. So then, but when you become a leader, it changes completely as well. And I feel like even I'm still on that growth, learning, that servant leadership journey. It takes time as well. How do you do that on scale?
Workers too.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. A few people have asked in the chat, how do you do that on scale? And I think that was a question we actually had anyway here from Michaela, right? It's all well, and I think in smaller organizations like for my own, it's very easy to control that because I have a small team. How are you achieving that on scale, Michaela? And also love to hear from anyone else if you've got any ideas of how we can do that.
I mean, that's not an easy one, definitely. I mean, even on a small scale, it's a journey, as we just discussed. I think in a large organization, you need to walk the talk even stronger. It needs to be lived from top down to make it visible, because otherwise empowerment gets stuck at some points within the hierarchies and you never reach the organization. So the first important thing, or the first major lever from my perspective, is really walk the talk right from the top. And that's not easy, especially for higher ranking managers, also admitting that they probably made a failure, or what you just said, stepping back. Not losing control, but letting go control. But also what you just said, Chris, probably accepting that someone else is smarter or has a better idea. This is not easy, and really bringing that in the heads of our managers to showcase that's really the culture we want to experience throughout the whole company. That's an important thing. That's the first one. And the second one, from my perspective, more linking back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of empowering with tools and approaches, is digital tools, especially AI-based tools. When we want to scale approaches or tools, digitalization is the lever, and now AI-based tools to quite a large extent, they allow not only for scaling but also for individualization and personalization. Especially if we also look at what our people want. They are not patient. If they want to act, they want to do it now. So we need to provide scalable stuff 24/7, where they can access it whenever they have a minute. Because as we learned all within the last 2 years, everybody structures his or her day differently. And there must be a slot for one to learn, and then they must be able to access whatever learning they need. Or some people block a day, and if the person they would need to talk to is not there, they can't proceed. So it also must be kind of digital, accessible, very low barriers for all the topics they need to bring their empowerment to life. Yeah. So for me, really just walk the talk in terms of culture, and the use of modern technologies are the big levers to scale that.
Yeah, and I want to build upon what you said, and I think I have three sort of points to that. I think it's very important, if I were to say walk the talk, in other words, authenticity is quite key. Mm-hmm. What we have seen, and I will also bring in the idea of this tool that you mentioned, and the point is, what we've seen with regards to authenticity, that some of the internal social media posts, or I should say internal intranet posts that probably are recognized by employees the most, are the ones that are the most authentic and not necessarily the most nicely crafted as such. And that says something about authenticity. It says something about transparency, which people value. Because I think sometimes in our personal lives, we all know that we are smart, intelligent, just generally people are smart and intelligent. And I think at some point in time, I think in organizations, we put a sort of a different lens when we're talking about people. People are able to smell things if they're not sort of authentic. So I would very much agree with that. And I think over time, I think this sort of authenticity in itself is a journey as well that leads to transparency. The second thing I just want to build is that, the use of tools is quite important in how you utilize them. And what I mean by that is no matter what HR systems you're using or internal communication tools, I think they can be a vehicle to empowering people as well. Because many times I think we're all, I would just say for myself, I've been guilty of saying that the tool will solve something and we can let managers and people do something. But I think we have to make sure that just like in our own companies, we talk about customer experience, we have to be as serious about employee experience and really mean it. And I think that's when we design sort of tools and systems that really, really create value for our employees. And the last thing I just want to mention is that I think with regards to this thing about being a journey, is I think we need to sometimes these sort of really big words about transparency and empowerment, which is great discussion over here. We just need to sort of break them down when we're communicating to our colleagues in a way. And the two examples I have, I think some of you also alluded to it as well, is, for example, we did something called giving everybody a week in a whole year to learn. We called it the 40-hour challenge. That's a practical example of saying you are empowered to learn. And while if that wasn't enough, we also asked everybody that everybody should have a development plan in place. Again, not everybody will eventually make it, but again, it's also a way of breaking down empowerment into a smaller chunk to say so that people over time can see and connect the dots on how they want to sort of operate. And again, bring that, and I really like that point somebody made about how we operate in our normal lives and sort of make it a roadmap to operating in our sort of work lives as well.
Yeah, and just one thing I wanted to get back to what you said, Chris, earlier. So it is a journey, but I think it's like a snowball, right? You start small and it's automatically getting a dynamic where people are expecting this empowerment and really utilizing it as well. And I think one of the things that is critical is what you said, Chris, earlier. If you're then as a manager not supporting that, to remove roadblocks and really make sure they're able to get what they need. I think at that point in time, you are getting great difficulties because people are not inspired to stay anymore. If they're providing a lot of great ideas, they're empowered, they're taking actions, and then you say, oh no, that's not the right thing, or you can go to that person or organizations. And I think that's the question about scaling. Organizations and managers are not all at the same level of empowerment. So it may work well in your organization, but it may not work well if you're working and collaborating across. And so I think that's where leaders need to learn to facilitate far more than they had to do in the past. And I think this is something where it's going to be successful or less successful.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting because 99% of the times, whenever the business is really facing a challenge, 90% of the time it's actually me being the roadblock along the way, or someone else in the leadership team, and we just can't see that as well. So it's something I'm like, what's going on? What's happening? Why are we not making progress? And most of the time, it's our leaders, our managers, who are actually the roadblocks along the way. And Umair, I love your point that you made. The points you made, by the way. What do you think, Chris, will be the impact for companies that don't do this, that don't focus their time and attention on making sure that people feel, empowered and that they are transparent?
I mean, how are people ever really going to feel connected to the work, right? And it kind of goes back to that what and why. And if they're not really connected to the work and they really can't see their impact, this notion of belonging and contribution, I don't know how that happens, right? Without that, and obviously been hearing people talk about experience and engagement and how important this is and what kind of an impact that makes. But if we don't do these things, right, if we don't spend the time telling people what and why, right, building that kind of trust, showing them the kind of impact they can make, I mean, how will they contribute, but also how will they ever feel like they're contributing? And that connection is very, very powerful to outcomes. It's very powerful to that notion of belonging. But it's also really, really powerful when you think about well-being. We did an enormous amount of research around the notion of well-being, in my last role as a researcher. And it was all of the perks and the benefits and programs and initiatives we were putting in, millions and trillions of dollars being spent in well-being kind of programs. But what we really saw was when you actually connected people's well-being to their work, right? Work was a huge stressor for people. But when you focused on unlocking people's power and potential, which is very hard to do when you're not really showing them how to contribute, make an impact, and that impact of what they're doing, that well-being could never go beyond experience to actual organizational performance and how customers are treated. So I think it's that butterfly effect, right, that makes that super powerful.
And I think that butterfly effect is really, I think, magnified also, I think, by just fundamentally making this part of an organization's culture. It's much easier said than done, right? Because we all know how that goes. I think the biggest challenge is that, okay, we want to make, this is the culture we want to create, this is how we want to do it, but how do we kind of keep it in perpetual motion? How do we kind of actually make it part of the way we think every day? One of the things we've had to actually do is, like, while we constantly talk about, for example, like I said, autonomy, trust, and flexibility, and so on, it's also every time we have a new leader and they're kind of settling in and they fall sometimes into this control mode or any other mode, to kind of gently take them aside and talk to them about the culture and actually give examples and to help them kind of move away from that, because that's also a muscle which every one of us has to constantly keep building, because it doesn't, obviously, when all of us, especially leaders and everyone, want to be successful, and you feel like your success is going to come from that control, and to kind of build the muscle where you are not achieving success through control but by other means, I think is a really, really important one. It's a very difficult one. But I think I feel that that's super important for that butterfly effect to actually magnify and persist within an organization.
It's about momentum, right?
Yeah.
It's about momentum, and that
keeping
goes
it
back to that scale problem, right?
Absolutely, yeah, exactly.
Thing that we want.
Yeah.
I think this is what you said, Chris. It gave us a momentum, because if I look back, how we want to develop leaders in Siemens, actually that we want them to lead by outcomes, to lead by coaching instead of command and control. That's not new. That didn't come with the pandemic, but the pandemic made it obvious where we had leaders or pockets where who were still in that old school mode. And when people came to our organization and said, what kind of leaders do we need now? We said, actually, exactly those that we tried to raise for the last years. It's nothing that has changed significantly. Sure, the context of virtual leading, that had brought some complexity and some additional skills that probably not all leaders had. But the Tayloristic system that allows for command and control is over since quite a while. It's a given, yeah. And this I found interesting, that it was for people a trigger point to ask. But for us as an organization, it was really beneficial to use that momentum. Yeah, quite interesting.
Yeah, it's like I saw if you're already a command and control leader before the pandemic, and doing it virtually just made it 10 times worse and shone the light on it, and vice versa. If you were leading with empathy, servant leadership, then again it was the opposite direction, and people really thrived in that environment. So it's interesting to see that play out in front of our eyes as well. Which is interesting. A few people have asked about how you think that this is going to evolve, because I think right now we're kind of in that period where we're still trying to figure it out. No one has all the answers. What do you think the future of leadership will look like, or management will look like, in order for companies to succeed?
So, I mean, I think you have, as a manager, you have to make sure transparency on one side, but flexibility is a big part of it, which makes it very difficult, because if you have command and control, you definitely want to know at every time in the day what people are working on. And I think in future, you have to give the flexibility. I mean, it has been mentioned before, people structure their day very differently. They need to be able to get to those things, and often to those people across different countries at the time that it's working for everyone. And so that adds complexity and that requires flexibility. So I don't care if my team member in Malaysia is getting up and starting at 8, because I'm not on at that time. I couldn't control it anyway. So that helps in some part. I feel the fact that we were remote, because you couldn't do it anyway. So it's easier to let go if you're forced to let go. But I think the flexibility is one of the aspects where I see most of the struggles with leaders, to give people the flexibility. Specifically, if you're thinking about what the pandemic did as well, with people working from different countries just because they couldn't get back, they loved it. And so those are things where you need to find a very fine balance around where do you probably need people back in the office, and where can you support that remote, and everybody is doing it a little bit different. And I think there are environments where it's easier, and there are production teams where it's probably more difficult. But what I find interesting is every time it's production, everybody says, oh, it's not possible for us. And there's a lot that still can be done. But you need to be open and flexible and see where it can be done. So I think that's one of the most critical ones. You will lose talent if you're not going to provide that flexibility.
When we start managing to outcomes and not output, right? I think that shift starts to happen much easier, right? And I think that's going to be a huge key going forward.
I think that's the big question, actually, because what do you have command and control over? And at least in the case of skilled workers, right, that command and control, if it's towards the activities versus the output. I mean, several of us are using different sort of tools and processes, right? Whether it's objectives and key results or whatever, but the question remains, what do you want to have command and control over? And if you could possibly transition that from activity to an outcome-oriented one, then whether you're working virtually or you're working physically, you could still have command and control, but perhaps over the right things. And that should also be a vehicle towards empowerment as well.
Right. And I think it's also about how we kind of think about it, because frequently being a manager or being a leader automatically has associated power and status. And you forget, it's very easy to forget that the relationship between your team member and you is one of equals in some sense. You just are in different roles, and that's all it means, right? And I think that's really, because you may be applying your power through different ways, and they will apply their power by just walking out of the door, right? So it is an equal power relationship. We just, I think, constantly need to remember that, and I think that really is the future, especially for the relationship between leaders and teams and so on. And I think that's a hard one to transition, because you've constantly always been told that leaders must lead in certain ways, and that's I don't think is really going to fly in the future, especially when the expectations of teams is very different, and leaders have to kind of think about it differently and think about how their relationship with the team works as well. So I think that transition to a relationship of equals is going to be a super important one, I think.
People have to be comfortable giving, command and control to their workers over those outcomes, right? It's not that it's a bad thing, but it's shared.
And I think if you talk about agile HR, that's something that is required. So it's built into that whole model anyway. So if you're not learning to do that, you're not going to be agile, and that's required in future as well, I think.
I think there's also something to be said around how our leaders are also rewarded and compensated to drive the right behaviors. I see certain companies, they're kind of saying one thing, but their way they're rewarding leaders and the way it's set up is saying something else. And then you're kind of encouraging leaders to become talent hoarders instead of actually rewarding them for growing and developing their teams throughout the organization as well. I've seen that kind of balance. That I've got friends that are in leadership roles that I'm being told one thing, Chris, but the way I get my bonus is this way, and the way I get that is that way. So what do I do? I'll let all of you go. We've covered a lot, really, but parting piece of advice that you'd give to everyone listening, and then we'll say goodbye. You want to kick us off, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a lot about outcomes today, and I just think the key things you got to keep in focus are pretty simple. And again, it's about what and why, right? What is it you're asking? What is it you want to convey? What does this person need to know, and why? And let people figure out the how, right? It's okay. If they know what and they know why, they can figure out the how probably better than you can, right? They're the ones closest to the work, to the pain, to the whatever, problem that somebody's trying to solve. But as long as they know what and why, they can figure out the how. This is empowerment.
For me, the empowerment piece is like basically all about the culture, because it's not just one leader, it's not just one manager, it's about everything. And it's in everything we do every day. It's what people see around you. It's what people experience in every way they get touched in the organization. I think that's where it is. And that's where it all kind of clicks and comes together. And that's what makes it, I think, hard as well, which is why it is, I think that's why it's harder to measure as well. But you can feel it. It's one of those things which you can absolutely feel when it's there, and when it's not there, while you may not be able to kind of actually explain it as well. And I think that's I think one of the places where we kind of sometimes lose focus, and I think really a place where to keep a lot of focus on, to kind of make this part of everything we eat, breathe, and do inside the organization.
Three things that jump out to me is that, how can we be more outcome focused when it comes to leadership, as well as being more authentic. And at the same time, I think to the extent possible, there is a possibility to measure as well. And to the extent we could also measure some smaller achievements or sort of building blocks on the way, then I would say both transparency, empowerment, and the way you lead talent is a long journey. So not to forget sight of that as well.
Yeah, so for me, it's the trust and empower your team, be there if they need you, and specifically make sure they shine, and they will surprise you with many things you would have never found out they are capable of.
Adding a different perspective, because Aparna, what you said, the cultural topic is key. And linking back to the short discussion about tools. Tools are, from my perspective, the best vehicle to transport messages and culture, the way we design it, the way we have people interacting with them, the functionalities. My boss sometimes said, we don't do any features for the sake of feature, but for the sake of transporting the right messages we want people to inhale. And I think we have a big lever that we often don't think about. And as culture is essential for this topic, I think it's sometimes worth to look at our tools and to see how they can support this cultural change, not from the function, but from the message part.